Avatar: Fire and Ash is directed by James Cameron and stars Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, Stephen Lang, and among others. And this story, it is the third film in the Avatar franchise in which Jake Sully and his family are having to survive from a rival group of Na'vi that are fire-based, where they're having to go not only survive from them, but also the Cordage, the military colonel from the other films, is also after him again from the last film and from the last two movies. And it becomes pretty much like a mixture of the first two films in this case, as it's more of not only them surviving, but also learning a lot of the different ways of how the having to get accepted into the group, the culture, and everything that they set up in the last film, as it builds on more of the world surrounding with not only the two groups, with the water group from the last movie, and then now the fire group having to go after our main heroes. And it also deals with some things that are going on where Zoe Saldana's character, where she's having pretty much a hatred for all the humans and everything based off of the things that happened in the last movie. Now here's some backstory. Now this movie was directed by James Cameron, who, what can I say? I mean, I'm not going to go into detail, as I've talked about him countless times. You know, he's one of my all-time favorite directors. He's made a lot of my all-time favorites over the years, including Terminator 1 and 2, Aliens, among others. And with the first two Avatar films, I still to this day do get a kick out of them. And I can definitely understand they may not be for everybody based off of how they are with being, you know, overly stylized and everything. But for me, I think they still hold as really great movies to not only be seen on the big screen, but also it just showcases a lot of the emphasis of what they do is set up this world that I've come to really appreciate with both movies. And since the series has been going on for so long, and with this one the third movie coming out, just not even after a few years after the last movie, I get always excited about when these movies come out, because it really makes me glad to see that these type of movies are still not only keeping the 3D alive, but they're also keeping me very invested to where these characters' journeys are going to, as this is pretty much being set up as a five, I think of like up to 5 movies from what I heard. And so seeing how much I really loved how The Way of Water really took off a few years ago and was even better than the first movie, I was really excited for this one, but I also had to go into it with the right mindset that, you know, these movies are going to be coming out like whenever they can, and so it's just always really gets me pumped to go back into the world of Pandora. And upon seeing it, I can say that while I did enjoy the film, I did feel like it was a step down compared to the last movie, because it does kind of do a lot of rinse and repeat of stuff that we've already seen before, and also kind of mixes ideas of stuff that we've all seen in other films as well. To get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were all phenomenal. Sam Worthington, Zoe Saldana, all of them are top-notch as they usually are, and it's also great, also Stephen Lang seeing him as usual. And I appreciate that each movie is trying to also go through either all the different arcs that they surround themselves in, especially with Jake having to like really be pushing a lot more of his being the father that he really wants for his kids and everything, and then, you know, get into more of the culture and everything that he's adapted himself into, while also being protective and all that. And then you also got Zoe Saldana's character, who is going through an arc in this where she hates humans and stuff, but she's also having to like really see a lot of things as it unfolds, because there comes into some really big choices in the film that she gets herself into that has a really big arc for her character that I think really pays off in the end. And so she was great. And then of course Stephen Lang, I can't get enough of. You know, every time I see the guy in movies, I just always get excited whether he's playing a good guy or a bad guy. And whenever he plays a villain, you know, he always gets me. You know, he's just always so charismatic and just really plays that ruthless type of character I've come to enjoy with a lot of his movies. And what I enjoy too about the last two, like this and the last two movies, is that the bonding that he does try to do with his son in this, Spider, I think was very, you know, well done. And it just goes to show that even though he is a guy that you flat out hate, there's still something about it where they try to give him at least depth to it that I still appreciate both movies are going for. Because what the movie also accomplishes throughout is that it becomes pretty much a tackle of not only is the military also after our heroes, but also have the military also having to face and join forces with the other group, and it pushes the stakes really high in this regard. And that's what I really enjoy how the series is going on, is that they're switching things up in that regard, where you're having to go from just standardized military fighting the Na'vi and getting into more of, okay, all bets can be off, so to speak, when it comes to other groups that are similar, that are of their own, that are fighting the Na'vi as well. And it really got me really interested to see how they do with the fire group in this, because the girl that played the main villain in this, Una Chaplin, I thought was really tremendous. And I'm not really too familiar with her work, but I know that I did read up that she's the granddaughter of Charlie Chaplin. So I thought that was really cool, and she was great in this. And I also appreciate that this movie kind of goes with like a type of thing that we kind of saw in like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes or like some other things movies, where you have someone where you have like a villain or someone that's trying to learn military weapons and all that. I just thought it was interesting how they really put a spin on that, where you have the colonel pretty much trying to teach the other Navi, trying to teach them to shoot guns and stuff and all that. And it gets into some really good humor that I really come to enjoy too, the way he's trying to like show her how to point guns and stuff like that. And then you also have other parts where, and this is kind of where I'll get into more of my cons on this, only because it does kind of directly rip off some of Cameron's own films, but they do actually have some lines in here that are really reminiscent of Cameron's own movies, which I actually did find myself laughing at points, but I could definitely see the problem where it's pretty much like doing a nod to his own films. Or blatantly ripping off, but I still think that it still worked to its advantage. But the other thing I got to also appreciate, as usual, is the visuals in this. We've come a long way since the first film, and I think that for each movie, the CGI gets better and better. And I really enjoy how they really push the 3D in this, where you feel the atmosphere surrounding it. And seeing it in IMAX 3D is certainly one where you see the scope of what they're going for. And everything from the lavish water and a lot of the other like areas where they're fighting and stuff, like it certainly pops out really great, and you really get to feel when the characters are, it really gives you that good atmosphere where you want to see what you want to see in this world. And so, and then of course you got the score that does use tracks from James Horner's music from the original film, which is great. May he rest in peace. And a lot of the music itself as well is just top notch, that like they did in the last film. And then the way that the movie also plays into the arc that's going on with Spider in this, I thought was a nice touch, where he's pretty much having to try to adapt to the Navi location, because there's a subplot that's involving where he's trying to pretty much breathe air and stuff like that. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's a subplot involving where Spider's having to get more into the actual like adapting to the world and everything, and they go into a really big deal about this that I won't spoil, but I think is going to really be a crucial plot point of what they're trying to set up in the future. And there's also something really big that happens later on that I was really on the edge of where it was going to. If you know the scene I'm talking about, you'll see when you'll if you know the scene I'm talking about, it definitely had me on the edge. And the action scenes are always top notch as usual, as Cameron does. And now, if I had to get into some of my cons, I will have to say what does, I think, hold the movie back is that it feels like it's rehashing stuff that we've already seen from the first two films, because very similar to the last film, we get into a thing that's involving where a subplot's involving with Jake's son trying to, go after looking into like the whales from the last movie and everything, and it almost seems like they were kind of doing a beat for beat type of continuation or a rehash from that point. And then you also have the other thing that's happening where the same thing goes, where you have the colonel trying to bond with his son and stuff, and it gets into a climax that is pretty much like rinse and repeat of what we had in the last film. Only with it being, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but both movies have like a similar climax of them trying to really push it all out with the all-out war happening and things like that, and it has to do in the water and everything. And so it really feels like we're just treading like very familiar territory in this, where it's a lot of the same ideas. On top of that, it doesn't have quite the emotional depth compared to the last film for me, because it seems like they were kind of more just doing a lot of the same, been there, done that, and it feels a lot more standard compared to the last film. But with that being said, though, I still think that the movie is still worth checking out, especially if you get a chance to see it in IMAX 3D, because I know it's kind of really a thing with about style over substance, but in this case, because I was still invested where the story was going, and I still was glad to see they pushed the stakes with the new fire group that's going around and stuff, and it makes you really curious, like what other types of ways they're going to spin on the next film. But with that being said, I still found myself very engaged with this world and the characters as usual, and where the story is going and everything, and all the different things they add on, expanded on from the other films, still really work for me for the most part. I just hope that in the next one they don't really just do a rinse and repeat of the stuff that we've already seen before, because I think that it would be good to go in a more different type of direction that would really serve this franchise best. And so with that, I'm going to give the film a very high compelling grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who've also seen Avatar, Fire and Ash, and also the other films, let me know in the comments what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you on my next review. I'll see you later.